From the lowest to the highest, from the furthest to the nearest, from the smallest of the smallest to the greatest of the greatest, yoga is about all of life, everything we do, all of existence. My name's James Bogue. Welcome to the Whole Life Yoga Podcast.
Okay, so hi everyone. This is me sitting down with James, and we will teach a workshop together in Leipzig in October. And it's going to be a weekend workshop, 3 days from October 17th till 19th. And we thought we will sit down before that and talk a little bit. Last time we spoke, you were asking me some questions, and today it's my revenge. So I'll be asking you stuff just for people to get an idea, maybe for my audience to get to know James a little bit and the other way around. So nice talking to you in this format.
Yes.
I think my first question is what probably most of my audience is wondering, why I'm collaborating with a yoga teacher when what I teach in many of my workshops seems to be contradicting the kind of yoga that is popular in many places right now. So I would like to first ask you to just share what is yoga for you, and maybe to contrast that with what most people think of nowadays as yoga, or how they know yoga, just to be clear with that from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate the question, Shuka. And I think also what I share and what I teach, what I practice is also often very different from what people might typically associate with the word yoga nowadays. And so this word yoga, it's a four-letter word, and in English, there's the four-letter word, all these words that get used a lot. And when a word gets used a lot, often we get a little bit distanced from its real power, what it really means. So when I first got into yoga, I was doing those yoga posture-based classes, but I was learning from teachers who were, let's say, exposed to and or very steeped in a more traditional vision of a broader picture of yoga. And I'm speaking from South India today, where this has been a living tradition for many thousands of years. Many classical texts of yoga, they go back to 2,500 years. But they weren't an invention, the teachings that were put into those texts. They were already thoroughly tested, refined, explored, and worked with over many, many generations before that. So what is this thing called yoga? There's a lot I might say here, but yoga means joining or connecting, bringing together, gathering. So what are we joining? And what are we connecting? If we look into books about yoga, we might find ideas like yoga means becoming one with everything, or yoga means joining the individual being to the supreme reality. And these ideas, depending on a person's temperament and interests and background, this might sound really enticing, exciting, alluring. It might sound ridiculous. It might sound just too much for me. We can hear something like that and take it in lots of different ways. But while it's true that ultimately yoga is interested in cultivating this harmony and this togetherness through all layers of our being, and eventually that might mean that we can become one with the forces of existence itself, in yoga, we always start right here where we are. So yoga means creating a more joined up experience in ourself, for ourself, and for all our relations. So when I start to practice yoga, it's going to give me lots of lenses of inquiry for me to meet myself and meet reality more intimately. One of the very famous teachings of the yoga tradition is the text that's called the Bhagavad Gita, and it's given on a battlefield. And sometimes people think, wait a minute, I thought yoga was all about peace. Why this teaching on a battlefield? And when I first
What do you mean by given on a battlefield? It means that like that's where it's situated, or it was written there. Like what do you mean by given on a battlefield?
so the situation in this text, that the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, Gita means,
Yes.
and Bhagavan means the Lord, or the one who is in touch with the whole,
Uh-huh.
the one who's no longer subject to the limits of duality,
Uh-huh.
the master, you might say. And the situation is, this is part of a much bigger story called the Mahabharata, this great, sometimes called epic story of the Indic tradition. And there is this huge war that is about to begin, and it's been building up for a long time. And the whole Mahabharata story is an amazing story. I love working with it. Sometimes I do programs about it. And the teaching of the Gita, the most important warrior in one of the armies that's associated with the forces that are going to help restore balance and harmony, he asks his charioteer, who happens to be Krishna, an embodiment of this supreme reality, to take him between the two sets of armies to see with whom he must deal with in this terrible battle. And this warrior is called Arjuna, and he's a very experienced warrior. Normally, when he goes to the battlefield, he feels full of enthusiasm because the battlefield is the arena where he can express his unique gifts. He's an amazing archer. He's a great martial artist. So the battlefield, up to now, has been his dance floor, the place where he can express his gifts. Like you could experience expressing your gifts when you are breakdancing and you feel that life force coming through you and being expressed with beauty and joy and that amazing feeling of being a young human being. And you've got all this life force pulsing through you. And so you want to go and dance every day. Is that how it was for you, Shulkamir?
Yeah, yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, I was chatting with a friend. I'm 48 now. I was chatting with a friend in his 50s who he used to work in sports. He was a football coach, like soccer, football, like European football. And we were speaking about, as one gets to this age, there is a certain grief that one will feel because there's a certain beauty, there's a certain vitality that isn't so accessible anymore. So, but coming back to the idea is that this warrior, whenever he's gone to fight before, he's always felt very purposeful. He hasn't had any doubts about this is what I need to do to protect the people and to protect the values that are most important and dear to me. But this day, when the Bhagavad Gita is going to be given, he goes to the battlefield and he asks his charioteer Krishna, take me between these two sets of armies. And what does he see? All around in both armies, he sees the people that ordinarily he thinks he's fighting to protect. He sees his cousins, he sees his teachers, he sees the people he grew up with. And all around, he sees the men who are the husbands and sons and brothers of the women that he feels it's his duty to protect in that society. And so he feels something he's never felt before. In the very arena where he normally feels most at ease, he feels completely incapable. He doesn't know what to do. And so there's a kind of collapse. And so when my teacher introduced this to me, he then asked the question, not just to me, but to the James, have you ever
Yes.
done anything that was not in your own highest interest? I said, oh yes. And when I say highest interest, I mean that for your good, not because you want to gain something, but that's really for your well-being, for your deeper interests. And I said, oh yes. And he says, has there ever been a day gone by when you haven't done something that was actually kind of self-sabotage? And probably not. So what does that tell you? Yeah, now I get it. There is a battle going on in here. And I don't actually know myself that well. Because sometimes these impulses, these forces that have me doing things that are not for my own good, that go against what I would like in life, I don't know why I'm doing that. Maybe it's some social conditioning that I've got attached to, but I don't realize I'm attached to it. So, with the course of practice, one thing that I've recognized over the years is wow, I am attached to things I don't like. I am attached to habits that are not helping me. So, yoga as a practice is intended to help us get to know ourselves and to know reality more deeply. So, it's a lens and a method for ongoing inquiry. And in the Indic perspective, in the broader tradition that yoga is a very beautiful and important part of, yoga has this special role because it's the practical method, it's the practical way. And so yoga works with all parts of what it means to be human. So if I want to understand myself, where does this self experience? It experiences in this pulsating, miraculous, intelligent vehicle of the body. And so yoga, we can encounter, for example, certain teachings that talk about, oh, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not the ego. Sure, eventually I might be something beyond all of those things. But while I'm here, then the body, the senses, the mind, these are all things I can work with. So yoga works with the reality of human nature and seeks to harness it so we can actually experience life more fully. And the idea is when we can make each moment its own fullness, then we can feel fulfilled. And from this state of fulfillment, we can live very peacefully and very joyfully. So the idea is, I would say, yoga is a practical method to facilitate a more harmonious relationship with ourselves, with the other, in all everything that means. So with other people, with our environment, with existence itself. And so feel more gratitude for the gift of life, honor it more fully, and perhaps contribute something unique to the unfolding of life. Because the Indic tradition recognizes each of us is unique. You know, there's sometimes we've had this idea, oh, we're all the same. Well, no, in some ways, of course, but in other ways, we're all unique expressions of this intelligence, this consciousness, this power of life itself. And in the Indic perspective, there's the idea that consciousness or God or the infinite creative potential that is the source of all existence, it wants to experience its infinite creative potential. And so it wants each of us to be this expression of our uniqueness. And so the yoga method allows us to attune more to the unique beauty that is residing within us and is waiting to blossom forth more fully. This is a question I
Yeah.
could speak
I
about
mean,
at
yeah,
great
yeah.
length.
It's
But
I love what you say, and I think I really love how you're describing it, and yeah, I see many similarities to like the Feldenkrais method because you said this working against yourself and like harmonizing all these different
yes,
aspects, and in Feldenkrais they have this term of parasitic effort, which is um
yes,
like part of you doing something while another part is doing something else, and it sounds
yeah,
to me like what you described, this kind of joining up and harmonizing of different powers and abilities that we have, but not just necessarily on the kind of physical level, but including the physical level, but also including everything else of kind of like there are all these um, streams and energies and directions, and you kind of tune them into something of a nice song. That's how it sounded to me.
yeah.
And I'm
No,
yeah,
I was just going to say, Shukan, so this idea of the parasitic efforts and all of these things. What I notice in like let's say recent times pioneers like Moshe Feldenkrais,
yeah,
the practical wisdom that they express, we can find similar things expressed in these ancient traditions,
yeah,
from many places.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Yeah, anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah. No, and I think before we, like later on, I want to get into contrasting that with the kind of modern yoga we see many times. But I think before we get into that, I would be curious to ask you to describe a little bit how you found your way into yoga. And you said you started with some kind of more typical asana yoga practice, and how that, yeah, maybe like a short overview of the kind of journey that you've done in order to become this unique expression that you are teaching the stuff that you teach.
Well, that's a lovely way to frame the question, Shuka. Thank you. Yeah, I think short version is that as a child, I had a certain sense that there's something more than all of this immediate stuff. Like I remember one time being in the bathtub, age 7, thinking, oh, God is everywhere. God's in the soap, God's in the water. This sense of that there is something beyond the material was very alive in me. And I used to go to church and enjoy singing. And I had this sense of a relationship with something beyond. But at a certain point, organized religion wasn't kind of feeling it was like quite what I was, the way that I could deepen that relationship, let's say. But nonetheless, I'd enjoyed some of the structures like singing and like going to church. Like there is singing and there is silence and there's togetherness and there's aloneness and all these different constituent parts. I like those things. I appreciated them. And also as a child, like my early, yeah, from about, wow, yeah, quite young, sports and physical exuberant expression became a means for me to do. I mentioned yoga means connection, and it also means disconnecting from the sources of misery or the sources of limitation and connecting to this wholeness, you could say. So from a young age, I experienced sports and physical expression, whether it might just be by myself hitting a ball around or playing tennis with a friend or playing football with a group or basketball with a group of friends, whatever it might be, or doing some training. I found this, it wasn't even conscious, but I just did it. It was my way of disconnecting from um, frustration or pain or limitation. And sometimes it gave me this kind of transcendent experience that I remember pretty young, like playing tennis, maybe aged 11 with my friends, sunny day. And I just get so into it. There's nothing else. There's just the ball and me and the court and the game, and everything else is gone. And it feels so full, and I get so high. And now and again, I could get in the zone playing sports, but by no means was it guaranteed. But those peak experiences were so uplifting, so beautiful that it filled me. Let's say it gave me a confidence or a faith that, oh, there is something beyond this. There are these, I can experience something that's different from my general day-to-day state. And life is different when I infuse my outlook with a dose of that type of experience. So then I'm in my early 20s. I was working at the time in Thailand teaching English. And one time I was on a little holiday to this place called Krabi, which has got these great limestone cliffs. And I went rock climbing for the first time. Great instructor, took us to this quite long route. And I remember doing this quite like 30-meter route. And I accessed a little bit of flow state. I came down from the route and I felt, wow, that felt amazing. Because for a few moments, there was not, I was just there with the rock and I was really focused and it felt wonderful. And I came down from the route and I'm standing there by the side of the rock. And I'd already started to get into yoga a little bit. And I thought, yeah, this is why I really like yoga, because it's all well and good. I've got this great instructor and I'm here with a dear friend and we're in the beautiful place. We've got the safety equipment. But that was a bit like those times when I was 16 years old and playing basketball and everybody else on the court is also playing in a certain spirit, and somehow everything's firing, and I'm just totally in it, and I feel so great. But I don't always have 9 friends to play basketball with. My body's not always in the shape to, even if I do, it's not always that I access that state. And I'd already started to practice a bit of yogasana and recognized that it was inviting this state of, let's say, heightened presence or deeper presence in a relatively independent way. Didn't need anybody else, didn't need any special place or equipment. And then so I'd been going to some yoga classes, and I'd already had this kind of practice. Like since I was a teenager playing basketball, one of my coaches, she'd given me, this is when you come to the court, these are things you can do. So I had like a kind of calisthenics conditioning based circuits and shooting drills. So I kind of had this habit of some type of movement or some type of practice to try and balance the body and balance my state of awareness. As a child, if I didn't have some physical outlet, I wouldn't be able to concentrate mentally so well. So I'd always had awareness that there are these different aspects of myself that I want to honor. The expressive, communicative, I like to sing, I like poetry, I like to move my body, I like sports, I like that coincidence avoidance, using that kind of spatial intelligence, that dynamic way. And I also like quiet sometimes. And so sports had kind of allowed me to get many of those ingredients honored, exercised, nourished, cherished, appreciated in certain ways. And then as I got into yoga, I started to realize, wow, this is amazing because it's making it much more modest. Am I able to access it in a simpler way? And also in a way that's a bit more robust. It's making me more resilient. I don't need to go and do all these. I can just be, more content with what is. And then I started to read about yoga. And I think one thing that's different, this is in the very beginning of this century, so like 2000, 2001, 2. Back then, when 2003, I did a yoga teacher training program. And when I told some of my university friends, they're like, oh, yoga teacher training, where do you do that? At a yoga studio. A yoga studio? What's that? What, they do yoga all day? Wow, they must be so chilled. No, it's not quite like that. But those friends 25 years, 25 years ago, they knew enough about yoga to know that they didn't know what yoga really was. Oh yeah, maybe it's these kind of got some type of physical practice. It's got something to do with controlling the mind and meditation and mental calm, and it's to do with India. But people commonly, in my experience back then, knew they didn't really know what it was. And then there was a kind of boom, and yoga classes and yoga studios became much more common. And what I saw, what I've experienced is that many people now think they know what yoga is. They think, oh, it's just this like this stretching class, or it's like a type of fitness class, or it's to do with mindfulness, but it's a very narrow idea. And what I found a little bit unfortunate is that often maybe people they experience something and they think, oh, that's not really for me. And then they discount this whole vast ocean of very pragmatic, accessible, inclusive resources that so many people in so many different ways could find hugely beneficial. But when I was getting into yoga, so there I am, I start doing the physical practice. I was already swimming and calisthenicsing and stretching and running and jumping and hanging. And then I learn about yoga. Oh, so I start weaving in this yoga posture practice and a bit more intentional breath work into my day-to-day routines. And then I start reading about yoga because I realized once I went to actually what's called an Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga class. It was taught by a very good teacher, Adrian Cox, who'd studied with BNS Iyengar in Mysore, and also done Iyengar yoga, BKS Iyengar, so two different Iyengars. Iyengars are quite, it's not an unusual name. In some communities in India, it's It's a name that's also associated with a certain type of community. So but there's BNS Iyengar and BKS Iyengar, both hatha yoga teachers, but slightly different way of doing things. So this teacher that I was working with, he'd benefited from both of their approaches. And I went to this class, and it was at midday on a Sunday in Bangkok. I'd actually been out dancing the previous night till quite late in the morning. I had a loaf of bread for breakfast and then went to this class, and I was sweating so much, but the class I found amazing and I wanted. So then I asked the teacher, can you give me the sequence so I can do this at home? There you go. There's a sheet. And I started doing this. And very quickly I realized there's something else happening here to do with this harnessing of the powers of my attention or my awareness. So I started to read more. And then a year or
Were
two
you
later,
reading in English at that point? Like in what
yes,
language were you
these were
reading? Yeah,
books
yeah,
I was reading books about yoga in English.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
was all pretty rudimentary. But in 2003, I was then teaching at university in Bangkok. And I happened to go along to the yoga studio. Generally, I was just practicing by myself because I was marking student essays a lot on the weekend, didn't have much time to go to class. But I went along to the studio one day and noticed they had this weekend trip out of town to a beautiful green place. Oh, fantastic. I don't have essays to mark that weekend. I can join that trip. It'll be great refreshing outside the Bangkok pollution. So I go on this trip, and then I met the man who became my meditation teacher. And at that time, he was a 30-year practitioner in an authentic Indian lineage. He'd spent a lot of time with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when he was teaching prolifically, and then he'd become a direct disciple of a great Kashmiri saint called Swami Laxmanju. And so my teacher Larry had studied in depth the Vedic perspective and then this Kashmiri Shaiva tantric perspective. And I met him that evening. He gave a talk, and I was like, "Oh wow, this feels like home." And Larry says, "I always remember you, James, because your jaw was in your lap." It's like, "Oh wow, this is what I've been looking for. This very inclusive vision of spirit or existence, let's say, and how to relate to it in a helpful way, a pragmatic way." So then I joined Adrian's teacher training program, and Larry was giving satsang once a week for about the next 8 months. And it was just a magical time for me. And then after that program completed, I continued to study with Larry. And I'd also begun to sing in Sanskrit a little bit. Adrian had introduced us to this during the training. And then I started that practice. And not that long afterwards, I started to share kirtan, so the singing and in Sanskrit. And having read more and studied more with Larry, when he presented, for example, Yoga Sutra, I had read a couple of translations very diligently, not quite getting it, thinking, "Wah." And then when Larry spoke about the text, it just came so alive. It was so practical. And I'd previously studied languages, and I recognized, even if I read a French or Italian novel in translation, I'm going to miss a lot. So if I'm reading a translation of a Sanskrit text, I'm not really getting all of it. And I felt these texts, Yoga Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, they're not texts to read once and pass along. These texts are like companions for life. They're like a mirror text. Every time I look into it, it can show me something different, fresh, and useful. It can give me a lot of practical guidance. So I had already this strong desire. I would like to be able to establish a more personal, intimate, living relationship with these wisdom teachings that are encoded in these texts. So I'd love to learn Sanskrit. And happily for me, not only had I met these wonderful teachers and met Larry, who'd brought me into this kind of Kashmiri stream, but at the university where I was teaching, they also had a Sanskrit department. And so one of my colleagues, Bill, introduced me to his teacher, Ajahn Tassani, and I started studying Sanskrit with her. So all this time, I've
That was in
begun.
Thailand still, right?
That's in Thailand. So I stayed
That's
in Thailand.
okay. You studied Sanskrit in Thailand. Okay.
Yeah, so I stayed in Thailand 7 years, and the
Yeah.
last like 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, I was teaching asana a lot
Yeah.
and doing kirtan and started to teach workshops a bit. And I did teach the Yoga Sutra for the first time during that period. I'd already translated it with my Sanskrit teacher and studied it with Larry for a couple of years. Um, and then after that, I went to India the first time I came to India in 2008, and I continued my Sanskrit studies there. And ever since, well, it's just, then it's just continued. But what really happened for me is right at the beginning, the teaching was communicated to me by teachers for whom yoga was not just a one-dimensional thing. It wasn't just, oh, this is a nice movement exercise thing I like to do on Thursday afternoon. It was something that had totally transformed their life. And so they were sharing, teaching, transmitting from this place where it was about all of life. And that was my introduction. So I just thought, well, of course, if I'm studying yoga, I'm going to study with people who've dedicated their lives to it. And then afterwards, I realized that that wasn't always the case. Many people have had exposure that's a little bit less in that style and more, this is the class I go to once a
Yeah.
week. Person who's teaching, that's something that's just a little thing they do on the side kind of thing. Like, I like doing this. It's not something that is really part and parcel of everything that they're doing and cultivating in life.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I just realized now, how your talent and interest in language and the skill with that, which might seem a little bit unrelated to the project of something like yoga, a spiritual embodiment kind of thing, how that actually then, allowed you to make the step that I think most people who are interested in yoga don't do, because it's a big step to actually learn the language so you can read the original text. And yeah, I think that's a very, I mean, I think at that point you have access to something that most of the um, yeah, yoga teachers I know, I think do not. And I just realized that this language, you as little language nerd, that this was a lucky gift to have, in order to deepen the teachings. And yeah, I find it interesting, the relationship between language, texts, words, and this kind of embodied teaching, where many of them are beyond language, but they're
Yes.
so codified in a very specific
Yes.
way. And as you said, like all translations, they go, through, again, someone else's mediation of it. And even if already your own perspective, every time you look back at those texts, changes, and you say it's like a mirror, like
Yeah.
giving you information, then of course part of that goes through the perspective of the person who has translated it on in that specific time for them. So
Yes.
yeah, I think that's
Definitely.
an interesting thing. And um, the other thing that I found interesting was when you talked about the rock climbing, for example, this idea that these kind of states that attracted you to
Mm.
practice in the first place, these kind of altered states or height states, that they arise in a certain condition, but you seem to like not get hooked too much to say like, okay, so I just go, like rock climbing more and more extreme in order to access that. But you had this kind of sense of, yeah, I would like to, bring that to different places and not get attached to those specific ways of entering
Yes.
entering that place. And for me, that seems very important, because even within the context of a yoga asana practice, I feel like, people get attached to doing this kind of sequence, and if like when I did Ashtanga yoga, I had like my 3 years of daily practice, and if one day I didn't do it, I felt crap the whole day, because I felt like, oh my
Mm.
god, my body is not good like this, and I can, yeah. So I got very attached to that place, and it was a very interesting experience every morning to do that thing, and I felt good
Mm.
afterwards. But in my mind, it was not. I wasn't at that place that I looked for. Like perhaps there are, in many different situations, different access points to a kind of presence. Doesn't need to be the same kind of altered state, of course. But yeah, when I was walking today through Hong Kong, I was the first 2 times I was walking outside, I felt a bit like, oh, it's kind of, it was like rainy and humid and noisy, and the traffic lights, they sound like machine guns, and like I kind of was like, oh my god, I don't really feel well in that place. And then the third time I was going out, I was kind of deliberately seeing like, okay, can I just kind of observe and get interested in what there is? And then I started to really enjoy it, and like almost like a walk through the forest. And I was just thinking
Yeah.
about that when you described that yeah, that idea of, yeah, can I access a kind of connection, not the same kind of state, but a type of connectedness that is similar in different kind of experiences in places where maybe there are not all the team players of the basketball on the court in
Yeah.
order to make you get there. And yeah, so I would be curious about how you got interested in that, and maybe what your thoughts are on how yoga is known nowadays. Or I mean, I don't know if you know it nowadays the way I know it, but for me, modern postural yoga seems really people like it's this retreat. They go
Yeah.
and they do this and they have this nice little experience, and then they go out, and I feel like it's all the same. And then you go there again, you
Yes.
build yourself a little bit up. But for me, I didn't learn in a yoga class about this. How do I look for this kind of harmony and connection in different ways without saying like, okay, I need to sit in that position and have my yoga mat
Mm.
and do this kind of breath work in order to get there. So there's something there. Like for me, it's a little bit of a gap, and I wonder how you started to bridge that.
Yes. Thank you for that question, Shuka. I mean, I think the thing I'll say first of all is that in the yoga tradition, and this is one of the benefits of, let's say, exploring the traditional teachings in a deeper way. They say a little bit of learning is very dangerous. And from the yogic perspective, as a human being, we're ignorant. So we always have to recognize that and work humbly and honestly, kind of pragmatically with that. We can only see so much. We can only see a little bit of the whole picture. But I think what sometimes happens is that we get excited about we see something or we experience something that's helpful, and then we grab onto it with this grabbing, hungry part of ourselves. But in the yoga tradition, what we're aiming to cultivate is a connection to the part of ourselves that doesn't depend on any particular setting or milieu or surroundings. So any technique, it's intended to invite us into an experience which ultimately will melt away the need for any technique at all.
And like, I was curious, when did you first hear that in a yoga context, or like when did that
Yeah.
idea
So I
come to your practice?
so I heard it very explicitly 2003 when I was studying with Larry. So
Mhm.
from within the yoga tradition, and they say the golden chain will bind you just as surely as the iron one. So here I am with all my habits, tendencies, addictions, woundings, and associated attachments. And then, for example, I go to this particular style of yoga class, and it's this nice sanctuary. I feel good. It's like a sport, in Spanish, deporte. It's the root is export. So when I play a sport, I can export myself out of my day-to-day concerns and forget about it for a while. So when I first went to yogasana and started practicing, if all the angst, the trouble, the stress, the concerns about work, I'm going to do this sequence of postures. I'm going to be focused on the breath and the bandha and the drishti. So the gaze point, my connection to the rooting of the earth, and the melody and rhythm and quality of my breath. And that focus is going to disconnect me and export me from my worries and my concerns. Wonderful. But my worries and my concerns, what were they triggered by? They were triggered by trivial day-to-day things. So if I'm dependent on doing this particular technique, I'm a slave to the technique. I'm not free. And yoga is interested in making us free. Now, this can sound like some great grandiose thing. I remember one time also in the early 2000s, I was in a class for yoga teachers by senior Iyengar teacher. And he said, "Why are you doing yoga?" I said, I want to be free. And he was like, he was rather taken aback because he expected, no, I want to be able to, move freely, move well when I'm older, or I don't want to have back pain. And I said, I want to be free. He said, what do you mean? I said, I want to be free from all of these inner pathologies that keep me chained to unnecessary misery. I'm not saying this in a pretentious way. I suffer because I'm attached to habits and tendencies, and because I have belief systems that mean I know I've experienced life is full of nectarine wonder, but I don't access it a lot of the time. And I've already seen for myself one of the main reasons for that is my own conditioning. So that's what I want to be free from. And that's what yoga invites. It's inviting us to liberate ourselves from these limiting partialities and attachments that chain us to unnecessary suffering. So I heard all this right at the beginning of my yoga journey in a very clear, tangible, and pragmatic, down to earth way. Communicate with a lot of generosity, good humor, kindness, and humanity. uh, and then what that coalesced with in my own awareness was by that stage, I'd already had a couple of injuries and I'd experienced some significant. I knew that those high states that I'd experienced playing tennis or basketball, they weren't reliable mechanisms to experience that, that state of greater freedom. But I also had the sense I don't want to be dependent on a particular technique. Now, this is part of the learning process because ultimately, if we want to proceed step by step, there will be a refinement of our habits. It's not that I'm just going to become free of all habits and be able to live in this state of just operating from my deepest intuitive intelligence all the time like that. But I can take a more spacious and pragmatic approach to how I work with my own tendencies, habits, predilections, and be respectful of where I am now. So one other teaching that I found very beautiful and that came to me in those early years, one of the practices that many people get introduced to in physical yoga classes is Surya Namaskara, the sun salutation. And in the sun salutation, there's many ways there's many things happening. My teacher said, all these external practices, the external bowing down, and Surya Namaskara is a bowing down and bowing to the sun as a symbol of the light of consciousness, of the light of life, the light of existence itself. When I bow down physically, I am training myself to bow down in a subtler way, which can help free me of my attachments at the mental and psychological level. But when I do the Surya Namaskara practice, I'm also, from a certain perspective, mapping out the evolutionary journey of how I have become. So the shapes that we make, we can correlate them to being the mother and the father coming together, being in the womb, the circle of life, the container of the womb. I bow down to it, I touch the ground. I incarnate the energy of the sperm and the energy of the egg, and then the fetus that comes out, and the baby, the infant that lifts its chest and then comes to all fours and crawls and then comes to a bipedalism. And when I come back to stand on 2 feet at the end of that little sequence, one of the most important teachings is everything is all right. Everything that has brought me to this point, let me be grateful for it. Let me not be weighed down with guilt or shame or regret. Let me instead recognize that everything that's happened up to now has happened, and it's brought me to this moment now that's pregnant with so much rich possibility in which I can experience more who I really am. So let me be thankful for that. And so one of the other things I might suggest or like to share about what is yoga is that yoga is an active practice of cultivating gratitude. Gratitude for the deeper riches which are always part of our reality as long as we're alive. Because as long as we're an embodied being, we have extraordinary gifts of intelligence and awareness, but we don't really use them. And so the yoga path is a means to invite ourselves on this journey to discover more of those depths and those gifts. And we just do it steadily, step by patient step, good-humoredly. And when along the way we realize, and this has happened to me many times, like, oh, I've been in my own way. Oh, I've been gripping too tightly. I've been having these inefficient movement patterns, not just at the physical body, but in how I take decisions, all these types of things. When I see those things, rather than get down on myself about it, I can be, now I've seen it. And that's an empowerment. Can I see it through eyes of kindness and compassion? And can I be joyful that I've seen it? And then in a steady way, move forwards.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was just thinking of the role within your approach to yoga. I was thinking of what role like asana and or kind of movement plays within that versus in the average yoga class. And to me, it seems a little bit like in the average yoga class, like, the kind of movement and stretching is a very big part. And then there, people
Yes.
mix in a bits of philosophy, which is not always all too deep. And I mean, there is this attempt of making it something more than that, but the priority still often, for me, seems to be a little bit somewhere else. While what you described also with all the symbolism, it's that, yeah, you might learn, some movements, some sequences, but then you also load them up and like with symbols or with mythology, so that the body and the movement becomes a living symbol, a living reminder of things like gratitude and other things. And again, that just seems like that this movement practice is situated within a larger umbrella of tools, and which are all part of the yogic project. Is
Yes.
that correct?
It is correct. Yeah. I mean, what I'd say is that so 20 years ago, when I was teaching a lot of yoga asana classes in a yoga studio in Bangkok, my perspective was if you come to the class and we're practicing in this particular dynamic style that I was teaching in those days, you can get just as good a workout while facilitating greater harmony through the whole field of your being, while inviting a shift in your attitude and outlook than if I don't talk about mythology or what you're inviting into your field. There's no, you can nourish the physical body. And I actually believe you can nourish it much more deeply when you nourish it together with your outlook and your attitude.
Mm.
And so symbolism is very important in every ancient tradition because story and symbol, it helps integrate different layers of our psychic reality. And in yoga, it's very pragmatic. It recognizes, we get good at what we practice. So let's practice feeling how we want to feel. So in my approach, there's no means to an end. It's like, no, if I want to feel joyful, I want to feel present. So practice feeling joyful and present. And in my approach to asana, it changed it continues to change. It's continually changing. And that's how it should be in the real yoga tradition. You should be outgrowing your practices if you're really practicing. Otherwise, what use is the technique if it hasn't transformed you? That's not what it's about. In yoga, it's not like I find the golden technique and now I belong to this technique. No, the technique is to serve us. We're not here to serve the technique. So traditionally, you shouldn't be doing the same practice now you were doing 10 years ago. If that's the case, you're not a traditional practitioner. You might delude yourself and say you belong to some traditional lineage. Complete delusion. Authentic yoga practice is transformational, and it's quite quickly transformational. Last year, I was at a conference in India, and the best speaker for me was this extraordinary Shraddhalu Ranade, I think his name was. And he said, if you're doing a practice, then you should be growing 10 times as quickly as if you weren't. And if you're not, then you're not practicing. You might be, you're just entertaining yourself with yoga techniques. Real practice is transformative, but it's sustainably transformative. Why? Because it works with your nature. It doesn't fight or try to dominate. So one of the things that has happened as yoga's proliferated is that many of us who are teaching it, we don't recognize, because we're all blind, we're all partial, we're all subject to ignorance. We don't recognize how much our outlook and attitude is dominated, influenced, colored by our social conditioning. And so we live in a world where there are these ideas, no pain, no gain, progressive overload. These ideas do not belong in yoga. Yoga practice is an all the time, constant, steady, dedicated, wholehearted effort. And it should be intense. So that means it's a different type of intensity. It's not the progressive overload that will just burn you out. It's about nourishing. It's about harmonizing, about working with in a balanced way. Sometimes it will be appropriate to express with exuberance and do things that are relatively exertive. But yoga practice is not about depleting the system. We should always have more life force, more energy available afterwards. Otherwise, it wasn't yoga. It might be something that people might call yoga, but it's not yoga if it's depleting you. The other thing that I would say about my approach to yogasana, so the classical definition of yogasana, it's not just the seat of the physical body, it's the seat of our awareness. So asana means a state that is steady and easeful. It's when the awareness is steadily, easefully established in a robust, balanced, centered place, which allows us to respond skillfully to whatever life throws at us. So in the physical practice, if I want to be steadily easeful, I recognize I am a human being and I have these four limbs, and my body has all of these amazing capacities. And some of them will be well cherished, nourished, exercised, honored, respected in a classic modern yogasana class. But many of my other gifts, tendencies, capacities will be completely left out. And in the early years of my yogasana explorations, I did a lot of yogasana and not a lot of other physical stuff. I was swimming, I was walking, I played a little bit of sports here and there, but not much. And there came a point where I was not feeling so good physically. My body was craving curved lines. And one day I got out of the skipping rope, and I used to skip a lot when I was a teenager, and I could do it very quickly, very easily. And I thought, what's happened to my bounce? And I played basketball every day for several years. What's happened to my bounce? And at this time, I was actually teaching in Prague. This is 2009, I think. And a ballerina, she was a prima ballerina for the Czech National Ballet. And I was doing a kirtan in her home, actually. She had a small practice space there where she also had a gyrotonic or gyrokinesis thing so she was also teaching. She was working for the National Ballet then I don't know exactly what her role was, and she said, yeah, this happens to lots of my clients who they were dancers, then they stopped because of whatever injury, then they started doing loads of Pilates and yoga. And then one day they said, I used to be able to jump, I can't jump, what's happened? I said, well, you better start just rehabilitating it, if you use it or lose it. But I realized that the bounce, who bounces a lot? Youthful kids, and I realized that this vitality is also very helpful to be in that state where I can be relaxed and easeful. And so I started to then actively explore this more holistic approach to movement again. So I did meet some dancers, I met some martial arts teachers, I learned different things from different people. And then from that time, one of my friends also from Prague, there was the Udo Portal squat challenge and a hanging challenge. So I heard about those, saw some of his work some time ago. and then I did like Movnat weekend, did some Ido Portal stuff, Fighting Monkey. And some yoga teachers, there's an Australian teacher called Simon Borg Olivia. I really appreciate his approach. That's, I mean, he says basically, Tai Chi and Qigong is Chinese Hatha Yoga, and Hatha Yoga is Indian Qigong Tai Chi. And his approach again is about cultivating energy, working. I really like his. So some of the things I do are quite similar to things that Simon does. Some things. So other influences that I say a little bit more holistic started to inform the way I was practicing and what I was sharing. But when I'm teaching or sharing asana, what I'm doing is based in what I find in the yoga texts, like in the Yoga Sutra, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Ramayana. So I'm teaching asana based on the yoga principles as I understand them, not based on what some asana teacher thinks is the right way to get somewhere. Because in yoga, there's no destination. It's about remembering who you already are. Yoga doesn't want us to be anything we are not. It just wants us to remember who we are. And so the practice is a remembering. So all the members of the gang of my being, can I bring them all together so they can all have a dance party? They can all be there. Some parts of myself, I exercise regularly in my day-to-day life. So all of us, human beings, there are certain things we're good at, we're strong at, they're part of our day-to-day life. Other things we kind of neglect. Yoga practice, no, let's bring all parts of myself, including those ones that I habitually ignore. Let's invite all of them to the practice. So in the realm of movement, I do things that are much slower than would typically be found in a yoga class. I do things that are much quicker than would typically be found in a yoga class. I do things that are much more improvisational. I do things that work with flowing energy and
you do yogic jump rope based on the Yoga Sutras. I
yes,
think I think
I
you
do.
you should create a brand for your yogic jump ropes. Maybe it gets big like yoga mats or yoga leggings, and I think you would have made a good living.
Yeah, the other thing for me is that once we understand the principles, then we can apply them in everything that we do. And this is what the techniques are intended to do, to empower us so we don't need the particular technique. Now, I must also make clear, I don't want to like decry yoga techniques or particular approaches. When we work with like traditional yoga asana, it's a whole ocean. There's so much you can learn within that. Super rich, super valuable. It's not bad. Just my approach is based on my own practice, study, experience. And so I like to involve all these different elements that I find very complementary. So another thing that I do, sometimes we will make sounds when we move. And this is also some really top level boxers or martial artists do this. If they're singing when they're training, what does that mean? It means they're relaxed. It means they're not out. You can't sing when you're out of breath. So similarly, if I'm doing a back bending posture and I can still make a sound that feels easeful, then I know I'm not hurting myself. Because one of the tragedies, one of the sad things that happens in the name of yoga is that there's this strange idea that's become rather prevalent. When I execute that shape in space, then I'll have got somewhere. No, that's not going to happen. Just when you wrap your feet around your head and stand on one hand, the quality of your life is not going to all of a sudden be that much better. As far as we know, there is no higher incidence of enlightenment or freedom or great happiness amongst the Cirque du Soleil performers than in the general population. We want to use the physical body as the very reliable friend that can invite us into deeper friendship with all of ourself. So the body doesn't lie. If I try to bully or dominate my body, that will generally start to manifest in how I relate to myself more broadly and how I relate to my environment, my circumstances, and maybe other people too. Maybe that's just because I've been part of this bullying, dominating culture. In the world, there's these tendencies, human beings, it seemed in many ways we want to dominate things, we want to try and control things. So within the yoga tradition, at least as I understand it, and when one goes to the original text, you can see now it's very clear right from the beginning in classical Patanjalian Yoga Sutra yoga, when we come to the 8 limbs, first of the 8 limbs is yamas, and the first principle is ahimsa. It means do no harm, cultivate harmony, be kind, be loving. So before you come to asana, before you come to pranayama, before you come to any techniques, there's the principle of kindness, friendliness, compassion. These things have all been laid out super clear. And in chapter 1 of Yoga Sutra, there is a very beautiful sutra. I've already kind of referenced it a couple of times, but it talks about not overtly, but just in the way I've been saying things. 4 principles. Maitri, it means be friendly. When things are agreeable, when you're in an agreeable, good space, be friendly, be open. When you're in a difficult space where there is suffering, be compassionate. When you see wonderful, beautiful, virtuous things, celebrate it, let it lift you up. And then, if you practice those things, how are you going to feel about life? I'm grateful to be here. We're going to get a lot of resourcing from our day-to-day experience. So then, 4th situation, when you see terrible things, when you see horror, injustice, it'll be much easier to meet that situation with steadiness and equipoise, so we can respond as skillfully as we possibly can. But the first, maitri, be friendly to yourself and to life. So before you start doing asana, if you're not doing it in a friendly way, if you're not doing it in a compassionate way, you're not doing yoga. So if you're forcing yourself to stretch and strain into a posture, that is not yoga. And so there's very little stretching in any of my class. One time a few years ago, I was receiving some body work from an amazing body worker in the US. And she knew I was a yoga teacher. Oh, so you must do loads of stretching. Like, not really. uh, because we can open the body, we can invite stability and say strength and openness without stretching and without overloading in a depleting way.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe just to finish it up, maybe you could just touch on the kind of different types of practices that people can expect to receive when they would take your workshop. So we've touched a bit on the asana. You said like talk a
Yeah.
bit about sounding. You talked about this text. Just maybe give a little overview of what are the different
Yeah.
ingredients that you use.
Yeah, so when I work on a weekend or a longer program, it gives us the time and space to do some different things. So sometimes I teach, for example, courses on a yoga text where we'll gather and we'll discuss the text. We might do some exercises to explore it. But on a weekend, when we're gathered together in person, this opens up the possibility for all sorts of beautifully mutually supportive, rich inquiry. So there'll be movement practices in which we're exploring yoga principles. So I might tell a story, or I might share a little bit of an overview of some yogic principles, and we will talk about them in a way that's very relatable to our own life and situation. And then we'll use that as a kind of lens of inquiry or a backdrop of support within which we will then explore physically in relationship to ourselves and the elements, the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the space, these energies that are all around us and inside us. And we'll also work with sound. We might sing a little bit. We might do some communication games. We might do some work where we do things, we explore quiet and stillness. And we might work with some unpredictable movement situations. Again, but exploring these principles. So the idea is yoga's offering us time-tested, robust principles that if we can apprentice ourselves to them, they're going to help us live life as this adventure, this journey. Along the way, we'll learn more. Learning is fun. We'll grow more. We'll appreciate more ourselves. We'll be able to laugh at ourselves a bit more. And we'll be able to, hopefully, enjoy richer and more harmonious relationship with ourselves, with this amazing, beautiful gift of a human incarnation, a human body, and our relationships to other people and to our environments. Those principles we will explore through the body, through movement, through sound and expression, also in stillness. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. I get excited when I hear it, so I hope that some of the
Same
people
when
who
I hear
watch
you
this
talk about yoga.
get excited about it too. So maybe, yeah, maybe let's wrap it up there for this official interview
Yeah.
part, I would
Thank you,
say. So
Shuka.
again, a reminder for people that are watching. So we teach this collaboration, this workshop, where we explore our, in some way quite different, but in at the core, I also feel quite similar approaches. So it's going to be October 17th till 19th, and I was sure I should say this with a um, with the dates. And the workshop is going to be at in Leipzig, which is in Germany. It's the city where I live.
Yep.
Cool. Then thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Shuka. And I think one thing I'd like to mention as well, I think I'm excited to work together. I get excited when I hear you talk about your work, but I also feel one thing that is, let's say, unifying in our approaches is many years of exploration, but with a certain lightness, there's an emphasis on just simple, joyful exploration.
Yeah.
And one thing that is also very, it's a driving factor in the work I share, is I feel in the world, we mentioned yoga means connection. And we can see a lot of disconnection from nature, disconnection from the vitality and the intelligence of life. And one thing that we will do when we gather together, when we sing together, dance together, move together, tell stories together, we co-create together. And I think this is so healing. And it's a small thing, but it can make a big difference. Is when we come together to do these very human things, is we bring our human intelligence together. And to give the example of singing, we'll probably sing together a little bit along the way. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced singer at all. We've all got a voice. We can just enjoy it. It doesn't have to sound any particular way. But when we do that, we connect to something very deep in our DNA because humans have, when we were working together in the field, in a mine, when we're rowing on a boat, when we're walking across the desert, all throughout our ancestry, gathering to sing and dance and have story together. It's going to kindle this deep ancestral memory and connect us to part of the extraordinary legacy of the intelligence of the evolution that's brought us here. And you mentioned yoga is about remembering and integrating, to integrate more of our true potential, who we really are. And I think that the disconnect that can sometimes happen or be exacerbated in the fast-paced and online modern world, when we come together, we can have a lot of fun in such a simple way. And we can access a lot of beauty in such a simple way. And I think that is I find it very healing. And I do think that it's valuable for us to gather in this way. And so I
When when
extend.
I when I was doing one of Simon Thakur's online qigong classes, there was also this point we did this like kind of body scan and meditation, and like I felt really great. And then he also said like, and you might like feel really great in asking yourself like, am I allowed to feel that great in public? And I just loved the moment when he said that, and I was just remembering that when you said about this very easy, simple, um, light and playful ways, where the very very simple things like just
Yes.
playing or just playing the most simple game within a context and with an attitude can just be really really joyful.
Yeah. And what I
Yes,
noticed,
you are allowed to feel that great in public.
yeah, because I've noticed as well the things that maybe we get triggered by that are difficult for us. These are simple, small day-to-day things, trivial things that are part of our just day-to-day life. So if we're relying on peak experiences to alleviate that, that's not very efficient. If we can find the joy in the simple things, then we can be really quite empowered. And
Yeah.
in finding the joy in those simple things, it can help us navigate challenges significantly easier. Yeah. So I'm very much look forward to coming to Leipzig. It's quite
Yeah,
soon
me
now.
too.
Yeah.
Me too. It's quite soon, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Shall
Thanks so
we?
much for today, Shuka. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.